Wow, good morning. Come on in, come on in. I'm a little nervous because UX people make me nervous. Just kidding, just kidding. Who was in my workshop yesterday? Okay, all of you? Great. This is the address where you can get the slides. I promised them to you, so jot that down really, really quick. Or take a picture of it, or come up to me afterwards. Okay. So, we're going to be talking about deception for the next half an hour, and there's a lot of deception in web design, and what I'd like to talk about is give a couple of examples of how deception is used on the web in design, and also offer some alternatives, because there are a lot of alternatives to get what you need without resorting to deceiving users. So what we're basically talking about today is design decisions, which this was a restroom at a conference I spoke at about 2 weeks ago. And it might take a minute, but there really isn't a whole lot of space in between these two things, right? Someone actually thought that this was a logical way to put these things together. So there's not a whole lot of space here if you have two people. You probably know each other really well. I just figured they're both for me, so I just kind of kept going back and forth, you know. When I do these conferences, I usually I get travel insurance. Well, I used to. And this is a website where I get my travel insurance. And it's kind of the Dutch Automobile Association, so anyone who's Dutch will recognize this one. And it's kind of a good example of what I want to talk about today. So there are two types of travel insurance on this website. They have the short-term travel insurance, which is like for one single trip, and then they have this continuous, like, recurring subscription model, so you pay on a yearly basis. Obviously, they want to sell you that yearly subscription, right? So when you go up to the insurance menu here, they have basically every single insurance except for the short-term, single-use, one-trip insurance. It's really hard to find that. So they have just travel insurance, right? So you click on that, and you get this little thing here, but this is for the long-term insurance, right? You have to actually scroll down to see that there are two different types, and this is the one I want over here. So this means short-term travel insurance. So even things like the placement of this one, it's on the left-hand side, it's more prominent in that way. They're trying to influence me, in a certain sense, to get this long-term subscription. So here, I chose short-term, and I fill in this form, and this says calculate what your premium is for that short-term insurance, all right? And then after I've filled everything in, I get this total here, and I can click this button to continue, right? Except that's not what that button is. What this button does is it actually makes it, you're choosing the long-term recurring subscription, okay? It just seems it's right underneath the total, and you get this different total, which is your yearly total, and you can continue that way. This is sticky. It sticks to the bottom of the screen. So if you were to scroll down on the left-hand side, which scrolls separately from the right-hand side, then you see the actual button that you need to continue. And it doesn't say continue, it says go to your personal information. So it's not even clear that that's the way to continue your process. So it's subtle, and I'm not even saying that this is done on purpose, but it is, there seems to be some kind of evil aspect to it, at least for me. You know? So I hope no one here worked on this website. So anyway, because I'm one of those people who just clicks, and you know, I usually fill in forms by hand, just by typing and using the keyboard, I just accidentally clicked on the wrong button. Okay, so they didn't protect me from myself in this case. So I got to the long-term insurance screen, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go here, so I pressed the back button, and I got to this screen, which says short-term travel insurance, and then this says product. I'm sorry you can't read this, it's kind of small. It says product, and then it says long-term travel insurance. That's a radio button right there. So on the short-term travel insurance page, the only product listed is the long-term travel insurance. So I'm like, this button says next. I'm just going to click on next, because I'm not choosing that product. And then I get this little JavaScript dialog that says, you have to choose a product to continue. So it makes no sense, right? So we get a lot of these types of things going on that are not necessarily super evil things, but they're kind of confusing because we change the position of things or the colors of things, and then before we know it, things change into something that's totally different than what we think it is, right? Oh, this one. Just read that for a second. So this kind of thing happens all the time, right? So I flew to London several weeks ago, and I flew with EasyJet. And here's another example. That's funny. Look at this time. It's 3:45 is the estimated time, but the scheduled time was 3:40, not 3:45. But obviously, for EasyJet, that means we're on time, okay? And this isn't really bad. It's only 5 minutes late. But you have to ask yourself the question, if that's on time, what's late? You know what I mean? Someone decided, hey, we have this margin of error. And, what is it, 10 minutes, 15 minutes? We don't know. So, and the funny thing is that now when it's 3:45, the estimated time is 3:43. And apparently I'm in the air when I feel like I'm still at the airport. So, crazy stuff, little subtle deceptions that go on, and they might be accidents, but when you think about it, anyone who has a motive to gain profit from you, they have a motive to deceive you. So I tend to be one of those pessimistic people who thinks that everyone's out to get me, right? But I love deception. I'm kind of a student of deception. I've been interested in close-up magic since I was a kid, and there's a lot to learn about deception and how to manipulate people and all these different types of psychological deception. It's a lot of fun, as long as you don't use it for evil purposes. We'll talk about that. So if you look at things like magic is an example of deception. Theater is an example of deception, where we as an audience are willing participants, right? We know that this thing isn't really happening. We know there's no such thing as real magic, but this is this moment that we can just forget ourselves for a minute and just kind of be amazed by something that seems like it's not possible, and now it is, right? But sometimes we don't see the real deceptions going on, okay? Like this guy who's actually stealing someone's wallet. So we think that this is what it's about when it's actually about this, right? The whole purpose of this setup is to do that. Okay, so there's been some actual research on human-computer interaction and deception. And Bruce Tognazzini, who worked on the Macintosh many, many years ago, wrote this paper, Principles, Techniques, and Ethics of Stage Magic and Their Application to Human Interface Design. And he had different aspects of deception. And one of those aspects is called simulation. We all kind of know what simulation is. So you're making something seem like it's something else, right? An example of this, and he considers this a kind of positive deception, is the trash can. Because we would literally get a pop-up dialogue, if programmers designed everything, then we'd get a pop-up asking us what sector of the disk do you want to overwrite, right? And we have this trash can, and we know we're not actually throwing something in a trash can. It's just this kind of positive deception. We're giving it a metaphor that we can kind of relate to, and it makes our lives a lot easier. Okay? So, University of Michigan and Microsoft Research did a similar paper a little bit more recently about all these different types of, they call malevolent and benevolent deception. And I was skeptical at first. I thought deception is, per definition, it's a bad thing, right? But not necessarily. And you can find it in UIs all around us. Like, for example, these types of things. So how many people know that most of these things don't even do anything at all? Right. So quite a few of you. It's true that a lot of these only work during certain times, like in the middle of the night or whatever, and otherwise you just get this feeling of control, but they don't do anything. Okay? They might have at some point in time, but in most places they don't do anything, during the day at least. Another example is the well-known and fantastic underground map of the subway system in London. We know that this is not exactly the way that the city is laid out, right? It's just a way of laying it out to make it easier for us visually to understand it. It's kind of a simulation in that sense. And something that we often don't think about is things like Ajax. Ajax is probably one of the most popular forms of positive deception on the web, where we increase the perceived performance of our UI by actually doing things in the background and not at the same time that the user thinks these things are being done. So we're kind of decoupling the technology behind something from the interface. And this is really, really important stuff and very, very useful, because sometimes technology just can't keep up with us. As soon as you get a new computer, it doesn't take you very long to get used to that speed, and anything that happens becomes very, very frustrating, right? So we have this good versus evil type of thing going on. And of course, we all know about some of the evil things going on, like dark patterns. So everyone know what I'm talking about with dark patterns? Pretty much. Harry Brignall has this site called darkpatterns.org, which is a fantastic, I don't think it's being updated as frequently, but it's a fantastic kind of compendium of all these different patterns that are in use today. And there are a lot more things going on than these particular dark patterns that are more subtle and therefore a little bit more evil, because a lot of these are pretty obvious. I think a lot of them have to do with this concept of roach motel, which is you can get in, but you can't get out, right? So Skype accounts, impossible to delete. I don't know if that's the case right now, but you have to write a letter or whatever, or call them up, and that makes it pretty difficult. Another one is this one, the bait and switch, where you think you're going to do a particular action, and when you follow that action, you're actually doing something else or activating something completely different. Okay, so they switch it up on you. For example, this color palette, and when you click on more colors, what do you expect? More colors, right? You don't expect a little dialogue saying you can have more colors if you pay for the premium subscription, which is exactly what happens here. Okay. So recently, there's this documentary around about this guy in the UK who climbs up construction cranes and he hangs from them and then he takes selfies, right? And I kind of wanted to see this because that's just the kind of morbid person that I am, this guy hanging from a crane. And I wanted to see it in Dutch here. So I go to this website. I see it's something that's just on normal television, and this website has videos of stuff that you might have missed. So I click on that. It didn't work in Chrome, first of all, which was weird because they say this video will only work in another browser like Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari. So it doesn't work in some modern browsers. And then I have to install Silverlight. And then it takes a while to load. And when it finally does load, they ask me to pay for it to see it. So I don't know. Why couldn't they just say this at the very beginning, this costs you money? You know what I mean? So I've never wanted to see a documentary more than that documentary at that point. So why do people use these dark patterns? Harry Brignall talks about different reasons that people might do it. And one of the things that we've seen is an increase in A/B testing. And have any of you seen that one article about AA testing? So you have A/B testing, two different things against each other. So someone wrote an article, they took the same thing and tested it on two different halves of users, right? And then had totally different results. It's the exact same thing. So it kind of proves that A/B testing would only work if you have a statistically significant amount of users that you can, get any reasonable statistics from. So that's one thing. This reliance on A/B testing kind of gives us this idea that if it's more effective, we should do it. And another thing is people have a pressure to get results. So if you know that you can do something that's kind of deceitful to trick users into doing something because you're getting more results from it, you'll keep your job and things like that. So the thing is that these kind of deceptions are really the low-hanging fruit of persuasion, because you can persuade people to do something without resorting to tricks. And it's like a news flash. Help people do what they want to do, and then you'll probably get better results. But that's hard work, right? That's kind of why we're all sitting here, because we want to learn that type of thing and do it better and improve it. So the way to do that is to focus on simplicity. And B.J. Fogg, who wrote the book Persuasive Technology and runs the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford, they've researched a lot of this stuff, as far the good stuff and the bad stuff. And he said by focusing on the simplicity of the target behavior, you increase the user's ability. And the behavior model looks something like this. And I encourage you to go to behaviormodel.org and learn more about it if you don't already. But you have the triggers. And a lot of triggers are like the calls to action, so the buttons you click or whatever. A lot of our attention goes to like trying to make more effective triggers. Okay, so they succeed here, they fail here. So people who are highly motivated and they have this interface that's not simplistic at all, but very complex, they're motivated enough that the triggers will work, right? But if they have lower motivation, they'll just give up. And if you have something that's very, very simple, then you have someone that's not very highly motivated. They'll be able to complete the action anyway. So simplicity, it's a simple thing, but it's very, very important. Darwin Ortiz, who's within the magic world, a very popular and very talented magician, in one of his most popular works, he came up with several clarifying techniques because, believe it or not, as it happens, when you're performing magic, the more clarity, the more simplicity you have in your presentation, the more you can deceive people, the more effective your deceit is. And that's positive deceit in that sense. And if we apply some of these principles that he wrote about, I just saw a parallel with UX design, any kind of design, really. A lot of these clarifying techniques that he uses. And if we were to apply these to our work every single day, then we would get at least the effects of all the dark patterns that some of us tend to use, without any of the negative repercussions, without people eventually just hating our company, right? So we'll just go through these really quickly. And the first one is to use fewer props, which my translation is add only the necessary things to your UI. We kind of take a lot of design baggage with us when we're designing something. So we keep the technology in mind that we're going to use. And I think an effective way to start designing an interface is something that I call the zero interface, which is to start with absolutely nothing. And then ask yourself the question, what is the most important thing that I need to add right now to be able to get from A to B? Okay, so the zero interface would be this conceptual model where you would think about something and then it's done. So I'd like to order some music, done, right? I want to book a flight, done. That's not possible today. So every single step that we place between thinking and doing is a step that's potentially too complicated or too much for users. So if we tend to limit things and start from zero, then we can create interfaces that are a lot simpler, simply by not taking in all the baggage, all the things that everybody says we should put in there. I think a good example of this is Todoist. Todoist is a nice app. Anyone use it? No? Okay, I think they're based in Portugal. Well, a few people do. It's a very simple to-do app, and they've managed to keep it simple after all these years. And there are a lot of features in there, but you're not constantly confronted with them, and it's just so easy to input something on your phone, for example. It works very quickly. Okay, so if you ever want to check this out, I think they do a really good job on a lot of areas. Another thing is to use a memory hook. Be consistent. Consistency is misused to deceive people, as we saw in this example here. If that insurance site would have been consistent, this is a little link that tries to attract you to call your attention to the recurring subscription. If they would have done that type of thing here, then I would never have mistaken this for like the continue button. Okay? So consistency is really important. They're doing two different things, and probably just to deceive me. Visually clarifying the props. So you have to make it very, very clear what everything does. But you don't have to do that from the very beginning. So there's this trend with mobile applications to give you some kind of a tour or a tutorial when you first open the app. And it's sometimes, I just saw one yesterday. It's like 7 swipeable pages of tutorial. I'm never going to remember that, right? So something like Todoist, I don't work for Todoist, by the way. I just have them twice in my presentation. But they've got this little thing. When I'm on the screen, this little pop-up that tells me this is where you share a project. And they don't bother me about it all the time. Once I click on that, they know that I've seen that, and then I don't get it again. I could always go to the help later on. So they're non-intrusive. They're making things easier for me. Right? Visually clarifying the layout. This is, I think, really self-explanatory, really. Just keep things nice and clear. I like even things that are a little bit more out of the box, like these Dan Mall's site. He's got these circles that are kind of hanging out of the grid a little bit, but it's still really, really clear. The layout's clear. This is a very important thing because a lot of designers just try to get as much as they can on one page because you have all these requirements, and it's really hard to get that order, that sense of order in there. Making the hidden visible. If something needs to be there, put it in there. So we have this type of thing. And this is a company that they do great work. They've done stuff for Slack and really great work. But they say, we make interfaces. You remember Flash intros, right? The only difference here is that it's not Flash. It's still this thing that doesn't really tell you much, and you have to actually scroll down or click on this link here to get to the information that you need. We probably know they make interfaces. So imagine if Ferrari had a site that just had the logo here and it said, we make cars. That's not going to tell us a whole lot. We want to see what you do. We want to know about what you do. So this is kind of this trend of making something visually simple, and visually simple does not necessarily mean simple, right? Simple is not simple looking. Another thing is to eliminate time lags and design for performance, as we saw with the Ajax example. It's very important that you get this feeling that things are going very, very smoothly and quickly. And eliminating interruptions, which is very important. So avoid distracting users. Okay, that thing on Todoist that was very subtle. Who remembers this? Right. You're typing away, you're concentrated. Hi, It looks like you're writing a letter. Get out of here. I was writing a letter until you interrupted me, right? So this kind of thing, too. This is the New York Times. And you start reading this article, and I don't know what the trigger is, but you get this little thing that kind of pops up, and then it kind of pops back down, but you didn't get a chance to really see it. So it's kind of halfway here, so I don't know what happened there. That's really annoying, right? This kind of thing. I'm reading an article, I get to this point, and this thing just slides up the screen. And I don't know how to control it, I don't know what it is and why it's there. I kind of understand what happened here. The designers had a problem, because someone said, I want to do this in a responsible way. So we're not going to do one of those overlay modal dialogues. Right? We need to do something different. And so someone came up with this. So the same thinking behind things like carousels, right? Which we never use carousels, right? No? Okay. Procedural directness. Designing fluid procedures. How do you get from A to B? That's probably most of the work that a lot of you do, is designing these procedures. But it's so hard, as you know, to do. I think Crate & Barrel does it pretty well. I think Amazon does it pretty well with one click, only that's kind of extreme because you can accidentally buy something that you didn't mean to buy, which I was like testing Amazon to see if you get, on the one click, if you get a, are you sure you want to buy this thing? You know, one of those? You don't. It's like, oh, I just bought my own book. That wasn't my intention. So Jared Spool, I'm sure many of you have heard of, has this presentation. If you ever get a chance to see it, I totally recommend it. It's called, Is Design Metrically Opposed? And in this presentation, he talks about reducing the options for user feedback to either a spectrum of delight or frustration. So trying to eliminate that happy, middle of the road that most people will choose. Were you delighted or frustrated? And how much were you delighted or frustrated? So kind of no middle ground. And that's a wonderful way of looking at it. When you don't give people a chance to sit on the fence about how happy they are, you just basically come down to the fact that every single design decision you make is either helping delight users or helping frustrate users, whether you're doing these things on purpose or not. Okay? So that's a very, very healthy way to look at these types of things. And anything that's like trickery, that kind of deception, is probably frustrating users at the end of the day. So Henning Nelms, in his book Magic and Showmanship, said some deceptions are permissible and others are unforgivable. No one expects a poker player to tell the truth about the cards he holds. However, if you try to deceive by dealing from the bottom of the deck, you may get shot and will certainly be shunned. So as much as we get these good results from trickery, we should think about doing things simply, making processes more simple for users, and we'll get at least the same results. So thank you.